you've got me thinking about that 100th year.
It's a big deal.
I was thinking I was turning 60, but I'll take it. Let me start by saying I could not be prouder of this moment. The American way embraces every single human being. And I couldn't be prouder of it. I couldn't be prouder of our new leader, Ben Jealous. What I'm awash in at the moment is my concern for my grandkids and their grandkids, your grandkids and their grandkids, and the future of this great country, this democracy. When Pearl Harbor occurred, before the day was out, I called home and I said, "Mother, I'm enlisting." And she told me she would die if I did. There was no draft. I didn't have to enlist. I said I had to. I didn't want her to die, so I didn't enlist that day, but I did some months later. I couldn't help it. I just had to. And everybody I knew had to, because it was in America we somehow all understood pretty much the same way. I'm not talking about Republican and Democrat and politics. I'm talking about how we felt about the basic gift of freedom and equality and such.
This year's battle is defending the governorships of California and Virginia. Trump's movement aims to take over both in the next 2 months. The crisis in California is the most surprising and the most urgent. And that's what we will focus on this evening. In just a few days, we're looking at a recall referendum that has implications that will reverberate across the country. Tonight, we want to give you, our members, our most active members, the latest information on the ground and provide you with some resources to help no matter where you are. For those who don't know much about the California process, this California recall process, it's really hard to describe what a terrible system this recall process in California is. It was designed by well-meaning idealists, good intentions. Unfortunately, it has only empowered an angry mob on the verge of taking power they could never win in a normal election. Here's how it works. Once the governor's political opponents have gathered enough signatures for a recall election, which is a startlingly low number, voters who cast a ballot by mail or who vote in person on September 14th are asked to answer 2 questions. The first is whether or not to recall the governor. Then they are asked to choose from a long list of candidates to replace the governor should he be recalled. The current governor needs to win a majority to avoid a recall. But if the recall is successful, the person from the list of replacements who gets the most votes becomes governor. So it's important to simply vote no on the first question. If there's a majority of votes for no, Gavin Newsom stays governor. If the majority goes for yes for recall, there's no way to vote for Gavin Newsom. It simply goes to those who would replace him. And if you haven't looked at who's leading that pack, it's a man named Larry Elder who believes there should be no minimum wage and once pulled a gun on his girlfriend. Now that person, that second vote, they don't need a majority. So it's very possible that a far right-wing candidate like Larry Elder, who gets millions fewer votes than the current governor did, could replace him. And that may just happen. As recently as 2 weeks ago, it looked likely to happen. Public opinion polls, as you'll hear, moved in the right direction, but that can also lull people into being lackadaisical. Trump's movement has a lot of energy to maximize their turnout. This will be a low turnout election. We have to match them with our energy and our fight and our vigilance.
There is this glorious organization involved now in the recall effort. to recall Governor Newsom here in California and its meaning, its true meaning for every state and every citizen of our country. I'm feeling everything I felt at the start with the concern I felt about whither goest our democracy at the beginning of People For. The right stirs that up in me. It couldn't be a more dangerous time.
And it's that commitment to freedom, equality, justice, and opportunity, and the belief that that all adds up to democracy that has united us for 40 years.
I bless you and the fact that there is a People For.
Well, amen. And each of our members, everybody who's joined, thank you. Thank you for being part of this intrepid, interracial, intergenerational, intersectional band of sisters and brothers, really working hard to hold our country together.
But I got a call to go to Fresno, which is a couple of hours from Bakersfield, to join the governor. And we had a wonderful, wonderful rally. It was primarily a labor rally, but there were a lot of community organizations there. I mean, it was completely packed with labor, community organizations, women's organizations, and everybody was out there just shouting for really praising the governor. And a lot of people had been doing phone banking in that particular hall. The enthusiasm was just incredible. It was just incredible. The labor movement is coming out 1,000% for the governor. They are doing precinct walking. They are doing phone banking. They are doing door hangers, going out and putting these door hangers on people's doors so they'll remember to vote. Our organization, the Dolores Huerta Action Fund, we are doing human billboarding. We're out there on the streets, on all of where the freeways are at, on the busy intersections, with signs that say "No on the recall," "No on the recall." So I could just tell you that the enthusiasm here is very, very high. At the beginning, we know it was pretty quiet, and a lot of people are still not quite awake. So we're doing car caravans through the neighborhoods, to kind of honking our horns to wake them up. And so the next 5 days, all of our staff, the Dolores Huerta, all of our folks are going to be on our C4, and we're going to be doing all of the work that we need to do to make sure that we keep our governor. By the way, Elders has been in our area now 3 times, and he had a rally today. We had a lot of our staff there that was protesting his presence, and he's going to have another rally here tomorrow. So here in Kern County, and I have to remind everybody, Kevin McCarthy's district, okay? Kevin McCarthy's district here, Elders has been here 3 different times, and the local media is just giving him so much attention. But we have to keep working. We can't take anything for granted, because we know that what happens in California affects the rest of the nation. So we're working as hard as we can to make sure that we keep our governor. We like Gavin Newsom. He's done a lot. He expanded our health care for undocumented people. I think we're the only state. And so people who are undocumented in the state of California from when they're born to the age of 26, they're covered. But now, and that was under Jerry Brown, but now Gavin has added that coverage for undocumented from 50 years of age above. So all of our documented folks are covered by our Covered California Medi-Cal program. In addition to that, we now have 2 years of free community college to everyone here in the state of California. So we're a little bit ahead. We know what our President Biden is trying to do that for everyone under the infrastructure bill that he's trying to pass in the Congress. But we already have that in California, thanks to Gavin Newsom. So we know that he's a great leader, and we want to keep him, and we're going to work as hard as we can. And we want to thank everybody here on PFA for joining us in fighting for it to keep our governor and to stop this Republican, we can call it, I know they use the word steal, but they really are, because trying to steal the governor's election because they know that they cannot win in a general election. So they have to use this recall method to see how they can avoid and also, it's also over $500 million that is being spent on this election. And that money could have gone to healthcare, it could have gone to education, it could have gone to infrastructure, instead of them spending the money the way that they're doing. This is taxpayer dollars I'm talking about, not their money, taxpayer dollars to have this special election.
I grew up in Monterey County, and we learned about Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks in history books, but you and Cesar Chavez were out in the fields when I was a kid in the 70s in Monterey, and been a hero to many of us for a very long time.
Good to see you, Norm.
Good to see you, Dolores, and you are indeed a hero.
Thank you.
That was wonderful, every syllable.
Thank you.
A lot is at stake with this recall election. And I think I am hoping that folks in California, but also nationally, see that there's the same sense of urgency and the same forces at play that we saw in the 2016 election, the 2020 election, and this is likely going to roll all the way on through to 2022 as well. So as Ben mentioned earlier, the polls for a while were looking pretty scary, very tight. The minute that ballots went out, there were several polls that came out that showed that this was within essentially the margin of error on most of those polls. Even if we defeat this recall, the forces that are going into this recall are still going to live on and are still going to be present here in California, we've seen nationally. So this fight for the recall is not just a fight to keep Governor Gavin Newsom in office. The values of equity, justice, and righteous accountability. So here in California, I want to remind folks, what's at play here, which is that even though the recall has focused a lot on the pandemic and has really built a lot of steam around the pandemic, this recall election actually has roots far before the pandemic. So the recall is very much rooted in very, like MAGA-like agenda. So it's folks who are really wanting to get undocumented immigrants out of California, out of the United States, rolling back on the death penalty eviction moratorium. These are folks who really have a very right-wing extremist agenda. This is who's behind the recall election, and this is the agenda that's being driven by them. Now, since the recall started and qualified, and since the pandemic obviously has hit a lot of folks from across the political spectrum have joined the recall. So there are folks even on the Democratic side, on the progressive side, who see the recall as a way to sort of like send a message or a signal to the governor and to the California Democratic Party. But the problem is now they're lending legitimacy to a very problematic and a very wasteful recall. So a couple of things that I want to get across to folks here is whether or not folks are big fans of Governor Newsom, not big fans, think he has more work to do. He is up for re-election in 2022. So that's a really important thing to remind folks of. He was elected to office in 2018, has served part of his term, and he's up for re-election in 2022. So there's an actual real legitimate way that we could be holding him accountable and sending that message. But the main thing to remind folks is that regardless of how you feel about Governor Newsom, he has actually achieved some really important things for the state of California and for the nation. So California has, we are still trying to earn our stripes as one of the most progressive states and one of the states who's sort of leading on policy and innovations for the whole rest of the nation. And Governor Newsom has been a really important part of that. So, when it came to the pandemic, he was one of the first governor to actually implore people to wear masks. He was the first one to start to close things down. And he was really paying attention to the science and making sure that his response to the pandemic was according to science. But even before the pandemic, he's actually made a lot of great strides on fronts of environmental justice, on expanding rights and protections for undocumented immigrants, reproductive justice. He's been good on progressive issues. So it is really important for us to vote against the recall to keep somebody like Governor Gavin Newsom in office because he's delivered a win for us. But we also need to go to the ballot and tell people to vote, because this recall is both about Governor Gavin Newsom and it's also nothing to do with Governor Gavin Newsom. This is about us as Californians making a choice about the future that we want to see here in California. So voting no on the recall is voting yes to progress, keeping us on this pathway to progress. And supporting the recall means likely installing somebody like Lear. Like Ben said, I mean, I don't know if folks heard, like his latest thing was he's saying like people who own slaves should be paid reparations. So like this is the type of extremism we're talking about. This is the messaging that's starting to resonate with Californians.
He also said Black folks were better in slavery.
Yes. So, I mean, and what I worry about too is a reminder to folks is even with this recall, even if we defeat this recall, several of these folks, including Lair Elder, they're looking at what they're going to say and what they're going to do in 2022. And I've heard rumors that he might likely be in the running for vice president in 2024. So this is a very dangerous right-wing extremist who has now a platform with the recall election and will likely keep growing his platform. So when I say I want people to activate around the recall election, I want to say the recall is both a wake-up call as to what's happening in California and the negative right-wing extremist forces that are at play here, but also this is a wake-up call for us to be called in to stay engaged and make sure that the Larry elders stay in the minority and that the power of the progressive majority of California gets expressed in this recall election. And so we need to make sure that with this recall, we use it as a way to keep people engaged on these issues as well. You know, as it stands right now, about 30% of folks have gotten in their ballots. So that means 70% of people who are eligible to vote in this election haven't gotten their ballots in. And we have less than a week to go in this recall election. So it's really important for us to get out the vote. In the last recall election in 2003, voter turnout was about 60%. And so I would love, fingers crossed, for us to see that level of turnout, if not higher, because the stakes are so high with this.
So first and foremost, if you live in California, please make a plan to mail back your ballot or return your ballot before Tuesday, September 14th at 8 p.m., right? That is the single most important thing that California residents can do right now, is participate in beating back this recall. If you don't live in California, we need you to call, text, or email your friends and family in California and make sure they have a plan to vote as well. And for everyone, please make sure that the information you've already heard tonight, the information you'll learn through the Q&A, please spread that as far and wide as possible to folks who need this information. Please equip them with this information to make the best decision and make sure that we win. And then we also have some information for you and some tools that you can use. So I'm going to drop quickly in the chat links to our website. So if you go to pfaw.org/toolkit.ca, you'll find helpful tools that you can share on social media, an explainer video, all things you can use to share with your networks. And then we also want you to go to pfaw.org/GOTV-Cali and help volunteer over the next 5 days to make sure that we're calling voters, reminding them to vote and to vote no on the recall. The question is, the far right has an enormous messaging campaign organized and funded. Which organizations are leading the charge to fight back in the narrative wars of the disinformation age? And is there any coordination to preempt the damage?
Well, I could speak for the labor movement. I know many of the labor unions, one union alone has reached over 95,000 people through their phone bank to get the messaging out there. A lot of the community organizations are using the social media to try to counter the misinformation about the governor. And so we do have a lot of different groups that are using the different media platforms to get out the message and to counter the misinformation. And you know, one of the things I forgot to mention is that California, we have over 80% of our folks here are vaccinated. So compare that with some of the other states where, you know, people are not vaccinated. And of course, Governor Gavin Newsom has been in the forefront of that. And also, he has been in the forefront of fighting the global warming. You know, California, we have all of these forest fires that have been going on now for a couple of years. and continuing. And then we have a drought. And the governor also signed a very important measure in the last session to clean up all of our contaminated wells that we have here, and to provide cold, clean, healthy drinking water for many communities that did not have that. So I just forgot to mention that was a very, very important measure, that it took almost 10 years to pass that bill in the state legislature. And finally, with the governor's support, we got it passed. So that message, he is a really a protector, you might say, especially of our low income and our immigrant communities.
California is, some of our regions are the sizes of whole other states. So it's a complicated machine that we're trying to get going here. But I do want to mention that there are a lot of organizations, especially local and regional ones, who are doing a lot of important work. And I want to call them out specifically, like Communities for New California, like the Dolores Huerta Foundation, who are communicating with folks on an ongoing basis. So it's important, right, that we're not just contacting folks for specific elections, but that they're hearing consistent progressive messaging from trusted messengers on an ongoing basis. So it will take investments into having a more progressive political and communications infrastructure here in California to get anywhere in comparison to the Republicans and the right wing. But we have the advantage of we're on the right side of things in terms of values. And so we know that most Californians embrace equity and justice and are pushing for the reforms that we stand for. So we have that advantage. We just have to take advantage of that to keep them engaged and keep them active.
And so the next question is, shouldn't a recall election be more difficult to trigger? And the other question is there any activity currently in the California legislature to fix the problem?
A lot of people are thinking about that now, because as you know, and this probably may have been mentioned before I got on the Zoom, that we did have a disastrous recall election against Governor Gray Davis, and Mr. Arnold Schwarzenegger was elected as governor. And when he left the state, we were like $14 billion in the red. And it took our Governor Jerry Brown to come back and clean it up. And, so now California, and by the way, now we have a big surplus. In spite of the pandemic, we do have a big surplus in the state of California. And dipping into that surplus, this is how Governor Gavin Newsom has been able to help so many communities and counties that needed that extra help during the pandemic. So, by the way, we do have a lot of good messaging that is happening on television right now. The governor's campaign has created some really very, I might say very positive, but simple messages about voting no on the recall. And of course, Elders, who is like the forefront runner for the Republican Party, he has said some pretty stupid things on television. So he is kind of helping us on the recall by the position that he has taken, like not having any kind of a minimum wage at all, being against a woman's right to choose, being against the working people. And I think at one point he said that they should put a microchip in immigrants so that you can keep track of them. And so when somebody asked him, would that really work? And he said, yes, just like it does in animals. I mean, this is a person that's running for governor of the state of California. So, and that message is getting around. So I would just say that although I certainly completely agree with what Ms. Khan said about that we need to have more messaging. If I can just mention Kevin McCarthy for a minute, because I am living in his district. When you watch MSNBC and you hear all of the stuff that Kevin McCarthy is doing about trying to suppress the commission on January 6th insurrection, right? You get all this information. when you listen to the local channels here, our NBC channels, our at CBS channels, oh no, Kevin is a good guy. He's out there fighting for water. He's fighting for the veterans, you know. They don't mention any of this other stuff that he's doing. So we do have to work in some of our conservative areas. And I say that Kern County, we're kind of like Alabama or like Texas, because the power structure here is still in the hands of people like Kevin McCarthy. And this comes back to this election also, because we know that the people that are pouring money into getting rid of Governor Gavin Newsom are those right-wing Republicans that are really trying to erode our democracy. And so this is who we're fighting. It's not just elders or some of these other folks that put the money up for this recall campaign. We're fighting, you know, Rudy Giuliani. We're fighting all of these, the Trumpers, basically. This is who we're fighting in this election. We're fighting the Trumper movement who are trying to take out our governor.
Marcus, I think to answer the question as well. So there have been several academics, news outlets that have put forward some potential reforms to the recall election. So I imagine once the recall election is done, there will be a push for that. I think one thing I just want to be mindful of, and this is something I have to remind myself too, is how we talk about these reforms, because of course we always have to speak knowing that folks will use what we say and turn it against us. And so we have to remind folks that Governor Newsom was actually voted with the widest margin of victory for any governor in a very long time here in California. So this recall election is an attempt to disenfranchise the voters who voted him into office by trying to do this through a special election this way. So reforms to the recall process here in California is about actually restoring the voting rights back to the majority of Californians, so that it's not led by a minority process. It's one that's driven by the larger electorate here in California. So I don't know exactly who's gonna own those processes, but I know several folks will be looking to make those changes. And I think the legislature, of course, will have to be careful about how they frame it and do that work as well, because you know, they got pushback for even scheduling the recall for September as opposed to a later time in November. So the right is very prepared for their messaging on pushing back on the reforms already.
Thank you both for that. The next question we have is about turnout. Right, we know that, you know, success is gonna go to the folks who show up. And I know that all of you have been working to really close the enthusiasm gap among voters, give folks the right information. And this question is actually specifically about Latino voters, and it's to Dolores, and it's about young voters in particular. So the question is, what can be or is being done to increase Latino turnout among young progressives?
Well, right now we're doing some work in the Latino neighborhoods, basically. And this is where we are kind of focused on. Again, I mentioned before, putting out door hangers, phone banking. People are actually walking precincts in the Latino neighborhoods. And with the Dolores Huerta Action Fund, we're actually very active in 3 different counties in the Central Valley, and actually part of Los Angeles County, up in the high desert, Palmdale, Lancaster, California City, which is a Latino African-American community. We're working in all of those areas right now. And we're doing it with these passing leaflets at the flea markets, at the churches. We're doing the human billboarding, holding up the signs that say no on the recall. We're doing that on the busy streets and on the entrances to the freeways, because a lot of this special election is just about reminding people that it's happening, because people are not used to having an election in September. And so, and there's a lot of really good Spanish media that is happening also on radio and on television. So you might say that everything is all out right now, and focusing, because we know that with the latest census figures that have come out, for instance, here in the Central Valley, the Latinos are now the majority. They're not the majority minority, they are the majority right now. and just making that big push there to remind them that they have to vote.
No, that's right. And, you know, one of the things that I'm proudest of for the work we do here at People for the American Way, it's work that Markus does and that both Norman and Dolores have encouraged over the years, is our Young Elected Officials Network, which is incredibly diverse in the country, but especially in California. And in part because of Dolores's encouragement, we're taking a greater interest in the agricultural counties in California. We will be hosting a Women's Leadership Institute for women young elected officials from across the country, but with a special emphasis on those from around California and from the ag counties next spring up in Sonoma County. And that is, to Norman's point at the beginning, the Barbara Jordan Dolores Huerta Women's Leadership Institute. You're such an inspiration, Dolores, and really do encourage each of us to kind of bring our best to this work. I hope each of you, everybody on this call, will take a bit of Norman's outrage and Dolores's fight into these next few days, really encouraging friends on social media, joining in the activism we're doing with the Courage Campaign, making sure that we each do everything we can to make sure that we don't leave any stone unturned. That's why we at People For are calling through all of our California members right now, more than 100,000 of them, because just as of a couple of weeks ago, it was not clear that all of them planned to turn out for this. We should not take it for granted that Gavin Newsom will win. Trump's movement has a ton of energy and they have a ton of money. Part of why you have seen folks sort of trend towards crazier in the Republican Party in the last 6 months is that just between his loss and January 1st, they raised 10 times more money than Joe Biden. They raised about 100 million. Joe Biden raised a little over 10 million.
Wow.
And so let us each be vigilant, please. If you can give to support our efforts, if you can give more, please do. But most importantly, in these last few days, please give your time, reach out to your friends, be active on social, and reach out to us. We're happy to plug all of you in.
Thanks and bless you, Ben. I have to get up and moving to something. I value you and Dolores and Irene and Markus. I couldn't. God bless you all. And thanks from the bottom of a heart that aches for grandchildren and their grandchildren. That's where my head is. And I couldn't be more grateful to all of you for where your heads and hearts are. Thanks.
Thank you, Norman. Thank you, Irene. Thank you, Markus. Thank you, Dolores. And thank you to each of our great members who joined today. God bless each of you.
I want to thank Ben, and I want to thank People for the American Way, because you have always been in the forefront of addressing the Latino voters. I just have to, you have made such a difference and you continue to make a difference. And so everybody out there, I just want to let you know that Ben Jealous, People for the American Way, Norman Lear, the board of directors, they have been so incredibly important in getting the messages out there to voters of fighting for our democracy, that we know that we're going to lose it if we don't get out there and fight for it. So we want to thank everybody that supports People for the American Way, because I can assure you that they are steadfast. They are keeping that foundation alive of democracy, and we have to continue working with them. And thank you very much for inviting me to join you this evening. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you, Dolores. Good night, everybody.